will you, now that I've called you, God would say, will you follow me? Now that I've called you out, will you follow me? Will you become the person that I have made you to be? Will you speak the words that I give you to speak out? Those are the questions for me that arise. However, Jeremiah does something quite human. When he hears all of this call business, his response is, are you sure you got this right? You know, I was sharing with the early service, all of us, most all of us, piddle around on a computer anyway, if nothing else. And I think you would call what I do piddling. But at any rate, we don't know a whole lot, and sometimes we have to be told by the computer what we really mean. Anytime you Google and misspell something, it always comes up as, did you mean so-and-so? You know, I wish I had a shut up button. That's what I wish I'd had, you know, just to tell my computer, shut up, go on, you know what I mean. Okay, but at any rate, that's what Jeremiah is doing here. He's saying, are you sure about this? Are you positive? You didn't get the wrong, there's a Jeremiah down the road here, different family, but you sure you didn't mean him? I mean, I can't speak, I'm just a baby. He wasn't, but anyway, that was his excuse. But my point is this. His reaction is pretty much our reaction to the call of God. And it's very relatable to all of our lives as we receive the call of God. So what I want to do in a very brief moment here today is tell you what I think we can learn from passages like this Jeremiah passage, from passages that talk about the call of God, and what you and we're all called, how we ought to respond. First is the statement that you probably would know would be first. The call of God is a personal call. One of the things that we don't stress enough is that when the call of God comes, not everybody is necessarily impressed. You know, when the call of God comes to you, not everybody is going to pat you on the back and say, "Oh, that's a wonderful thing." You know? Remember, one of the things that makes the Apostle Paul's Damascus Road experience so wonderful is that everybody else thought he was an idiot. Everybody else thought, "What is this guy? He fell off his horse. He's laying in the middle of the road. He's talking about some light that he sees." I mean, they thought he was nuts. And then when it was all done, he couldn't see. He was blinded. And nobody else heard a voice. Nobody else saw what he saw. But Paul saw it, and it changed Paul's life. I never will forget an experience that I had very early on in the ministry of my uncle. I was actually sitting up in the balcony at Diamond Hill Baptist Church in Statesville, North Carolina, and which was not a good thing. Whenever Philip, my cousin, and I sat in the balcony, that was not a good thing, okay? And you could see Harvey every once in a while. Uncle Harvey would be looking up there at us, and I behaved, but Philip was a nuisance. But anyway, at the end of the service, this gentleman came forward, and my uncle was very evangelistic, so we always had a lot of people come forward. And he started down the aisle, and he stopped when he got right down here, and he looked up in the corner of the church. And then he came down and took my uncle's hand, spoke a little bit, and then he went back this way. He looked up to this corner of the church. And then he went back to his seat, and before he sat down again, he looked up at the corner of the church. I said, "What in the world is going on?" Philip says, "I'll tell you later." I said, "Okay." So after the service, Philip tells me, he says, "Well, what it is, one day in church, he looked up and he saw the face of Jesus in the corner of the church." I said, oh, one of those, you know. He says, "Well, you know, of course I was wrong, okay? You know, for him it was an experience. I'm not saying that Jesus appeared in the corner of that church." My uncle said the same thing. He said, "You know, we're not saying that the face of Jesus appeared up there, but for him it did." When the experience that we have with God, when it occurs, we can't necessarily explain it. We can't necessarily get anybody else to believe that it happened because it's personal. It's unique. And God doesn't deal with you the same way he deals with me or somebody else, because he doesn't want from you the same thing he wants from me or somebody else. It's important for us to remember the unique call of God. Here in the life of Jeremiah, it was, I want you to be what I've made you to be. I want you to be the person that I created you to be. You see, I've been at work ever since your conception. I've been at work with all of the things human that go on to bring this about. Now, what are you going to do with it? See, it's laid out for Jeremiah. It's laid out for us. I have been involved in your creation. I made you to be a certain way. Now, that's what I want you to do. And that was the call to Jeremiah. It's the call to every single one of us. The call of God matches our passions. It matches our talents. It matches our gifts. We're created for that purpose. Isn't it a good thing? I mean, aren't you glad that God called Mike to lead the music and not me? I am. Every time I hear the choir sing, every time I watch Mike do his thing, I say, God, I'm glad you didn't call me to be a man. I couldn't do that. But here, aren't you glad aren't you glad? Okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, it's a good thing that he can call him to preach. You see, God knew what he was doing. God knows what he's doing when he calls us. He's got a reason for each and every one of us, a purpose for each and every one of us. It's unique and matches us completely. I couldn't do what Cindy does down in the FLC, but I'm glad she's down there doing it. I'm glad that those of you who volunteer, it's wonderful to watch it work. I came here last night. I couldn't even get through the lobby. There were so many people in orange and blue uniform-looking things. I couldn't get through. Upward had it complete. It was a complete takeover. They took over the whole joint. And there was people everywhere. It was a marvelous sight. But God calls us to specific things. It's a personal call for each and every one of us. It's also a process. And I want you to understand what I mean by that. And the only way I can do it is to come at it from this angle. Do you remember, those of you who are no longer living at home with your mom and dad, do you remember when you were called to do something? You know, I remember those calls. Jeff, and my mother. And it would go from Jeff to Jeffrey to Paul Jeffrey. And then after that, I knew I better get moving. But my point is this, it took me a while to get to that point, you know. But let me ask you as parents, how many of you parents call your children with the expectation that they're not going to answer you for a year? I'm prepared for that, Eric. I don't know about you, but I'm prepared for that, you know. But you don't call your child to supper with the intention that they're not going to answer for a week, you know. When you call them, you want them to come. God is the same way, but do we do that? When God calls us, do we drop everything and just rush to God? No, we don't. We're more like, go to the 6th chapter of Isaiah. That's what is more characteristic of who we are. In that 6th chapter, you see Isaiah being won over by God. You see the patience of God as God takes this person, this contrite, this bowed down, this humble individual, and works him toward a time of response. We're more like that. We're more in process. I mean, think about it. God calls us all the time. He tells us to give generously. Do we do it right away? God calls us and tells us to pray without ceasing. Do we do that? God calls us and says, love your spouse sacrificially. Do we do that? He calls us all the time to do all kinds of things. He calls us to not be anxious. Don't worry about anything. Do we do that? Not quickly. It's a process, and we grow into that process. Look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah's told by God, I want to make you a prophet. I want to give you the words to speak to the nations. I can't speak well enough. You got the wrong guy. You got the wrong guy. This is not right. Or Moses. Look at Moses in Exodus 3 and 4. I'm sending you, Moses, out to deliver my people. You are? Well, who am I? What if they don't like me? You know? What if they're mean to me? On and on it goes. We are involved in a call that is a process. Little by little, we are discovering our story and discovering how God wants to use us. We question, we wrestle, we fear, we need clarification, we want things to be made easier, and yes, sometimes we even flat out ignore.